Sure.
the loss of anyone. So that
Sure.
really we're saying that the notion of an immaterial soul, by definition, because it's immaterial, is that it's also indestructible.
I think the source of the idea of the immaterial soul that lives on after death is probably largely connected with the fact that the purpose of our living souls, the purpose of our brains, is to project into the future. It's to foresee the future and to have plans and hopes about the future. And those projects and plans and anticipations make us who we are. And we share them. And so we know that the anticipated trajectories of people, and we have our own anticipations for their trajectories. We have hopes for our children and fears for our friends when they go off and do dangerous things. And it's this forward-looking, future-producing activity of the nervous system, which we can't just turn off. And when somebody dies, all of those projects are suddenly put into abeyance. It's hard to turn them off. And so the most natural thing in the world to go on thinking about them. And thinking about, well, if Sam were still here, he'd be saying this and we'd be doing this. And it's a short step from there to say, well, you know, he is still here. Well, not here, but here.
But I find it very hard to see how they can actually formulate or conceive the notion of an immaterial continuity of an unembodied self, of how it would know that it was, in fact, the thing that had once been the embodied person with a particular name, with particular projects. It always seems to me that the project, the notion of projects and trajectories and hopes and plans and so forth are all tied up with being embodied.
Oh, yes, and I think that everybody cheats when they think about this. I mean, in the way that scientists cheat too when they imagine hard to imagine things. So people, when they imagine an immaterial soul, they don't. They imagine a sort of ghosty, sort of semi-transparent material object that's got arms and legs and a particular physical location, but just isn't, you know, quite physical. It's sort of like a hologram, and they know that that's not right. They know that, well, you know, a soul isn't really like that, and they know they can't really imagine an immaterial, disembodied soul. But that's all right. You know, these things are hard to imagine, and you know, physicists can't imagine quantum mechanics, and we can't imagine an immaterial soul. But you know, we can try, and it doesn't hurt to think about, you know, people playing harps sitting on clouds. No, I often ask my students when they were children and reading comic books or they were watching on television, did it ever bother them that Casper the Friendly Ghost could both fly through a wall and catch a ball? I said, why doesn't the ball just go right through his hand? And almost all of them say, oh yes, they hadn't noticed this mildly discomforting inconsistency, but everybody goes along with the gag. But everybody notices that this is not really consistent.
All right then. Given the fact that both you and I subscribe to a radical, unreformed Darwinism, how do we live with the notion of the mechanization of our own picture, the radical mechanization of our own picture? What does it leave us with as persons if, in fact, we turn out to be these products of ratcheting?
Well, I think it leaves us almost exactly where we've always been. We get a clearer view of the actual machinery of our souls, if you like. But what we thought our souls were for, what they were good for loving and for deciding, for making and breaking promises for reasons good and bad, that goes on. And we're just a little bit less disillusioned. A little bit disillusioned, I should say, about the nature of that process. But our moral quandaries are what they were before. Our moral aspirations are what they were before. Our capacity to love or to hate are intact. When I speak about Darwinism as universal acid, it passes through, it changes everything, and it leaves everything the same, too.
Finally, and this issue cropped up in many of my conversations, I wanted to know how difficult Daniel found it to publicize his disbelief in modern America. But I started by asking him whether there had ever been a time when he himself had had religious beliefs. Now, here you are, from everything you've said and from everything you've written, I suspect that you and I would in fact be called by other people atheists. Was there a point at which you became one? Had you always been one? Or is there in fact a history of the development of disbelief on your part?
I was raised in one of those bland New England suburban Protestant faiths, the congregational faith, which has hardly any creed at all, but lots of good hymns and ceremonies. And I went to Sunday school and learned the books of the Bible in order: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, etc. So I got a good deal of biblical lore, but not a stern religious upbringing by any stretch of the imagination. And I was always interested in it. Intellectually, philosophically, I was a little budding philosopher. I suppose I was a teenager before I began to realize that my interest in this was I feel like academic. I didn't believe it at all. And I didn't seriously think about whether I'd ever believed it, or whether it had been just part of a tradition that it was, go along with it because it's a bit offensive to challenge something like this. I mean, if you see a terribly obese person, you don't walk up and say, "My God, you're obese." We don't do things like that. It's just impolite. And if people around you are being devout, it's worse than rude to challenge them. And so I don't think I ever really I never had a conversion experience. I just gradually realized that I didn't believe any of this. I don't think I encountered many people in my youth who really believed in God. I think most people who say they believe in God, most people in the West who say they believe in God actually believe in belief in God. I don't even believe in belief in God. That is, they believe that belief in God is a really good thing. It is something to strive for, something to be maybe proud of if you succeed. Certainly you should try to believe in God, and you certainly shouldn't make it hard for others to believe in God. And the behavior of somebody who believes in belief in God is just the behavior we observe. You go to church, you sing hymns, you give money to the church, and so forth. If you actually believed in God, you do all sorts of lunatic things, and we don't see very many people doing those things. They don't put their lives on the line for God, typically. And I thought it was a little bit like belief in Santa Claus. It's something that we do. We talk about it. We sort of pretend to believe in God, and maybe the immature ones actually believe in God. And then some people grow out of it.